Outside Lexington, Massachusetts, on April 19th, 1775, Lexington's local militia of about 60 met British troops. The British had orders to capture the colonists' supplies of munitions. Paul Revere, who went riding ahead of the British to warn their local militias, tipped off the colonists. The Lexington militia was led by John Parker, who told his men, "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." There was a shot, and no one knows who fired it, but it became known as the shot heard around the world, made famous by Ralph Waldo Emerson. The British troops killed 8 colonists and then continued marching on to Concord to get to the weapons stash. The militia from Concord and Lincoln surrendered the city of Concord to the British because the weapons stash was distributed between neighboring cities. The militias and Minutemen gathered outside the town about a mile north. The militia and the British troops met at the North Bridge, and a British regular fired a shot at the militia, and the battle began. The British troops at the bridge were outnumbered and fled to safety. The colonists were surprised by their success. After the North Bridge battle, the colonists moved to a defensive position behind a stone wall. The British saw this, and a standoff of about 10 minutes took place. It ended when the British turned and retreated to Boston. On the way back to Boston, American guerrilla fighters were constantly attacking the British. At one point, the British were going to surrender, but Hugh, Earl Percy, came with reinforcements of about 1,000 strong. Percy made a mistake and did not take extra ammunition with his reinforcements, and what ammunition they had extra was intercepted by a militia, leaving 36 rounds for each man.
The Battle of Bunker Hill took place on June 16, 1775, during the Siege of Boston. The colonists learned of the British planning to occupy Dorchester Heights and the Boston Peninsula. The colonists decided that they had to stop the British force to protect themselves from an attack. General Prescott took 1,200 of his men and fortified Bunker and Breed's Hill because they were excellent vantage points. The hills were fortified during the night so not to alert the British. The next morning, the British were shocked to see Breed's Hill fortified with an earthen structure. The British General Gage sent 2,300 troops led by General Halley to take control of the hill. The battle took place on Breed's Hill, not Bunker Hill. The British hoped to march up the hill to scare the colonists away. Most of their muskets weren't even loaded. As the British marched up the hill, General Prescott gave his famous order, "Don't shoot until you can see the whites of their eyes." During the battle lasted 3 hours. The British were driven back 2 times, but on the 3rd time the British finally broke through the colonist lines and took the hill. By this time, the colonists had nearly run out of ammunition and supplies. The colonists fled back to the peninsula and escaped. This is one of the most important battles of the Revolution. This battle showed both sides that this war could not be decided by 1 or 2 battles.
The Battle of Saratoga took place on October 7th, 1777. The previous day, General Clinton captured 2 American forts along the Hudson. He also destroyed the fleet that the Americans were forming on the river. Then he sent supplies floating down the river that would supply General Burgoyne's army for 6 months. Burgoyne's army was comprised of some of the best grenadiers in the British army. The army arrived within 3/4 of a mile from General Gates' camp. Gates did not wait to be attacked by the British force. He sent his men into the British flank and directly attacked the grenadiers. The British cannon was constantly taken and retaken by both sides. Finally, one of the cannons was permanently taken by the Americans and was turned against the British. General Benedict Arnold had his army taken away from him the previous day before the battle started because of an argument that he had with General Gates. When Arnold heard the noise of combat, he left the camp and rode into the battle lines. When Gates saw Arnold riding into the battle, He sent an orderly to try to stop him, but Arnold went on and took 3 companies that were previously his. The men greeted him with great happiness. Arnold put himself into the thickest of the fight and charged many times into the British ranks with sword drawn. The British officers also did an excellent job of encouraging their men and keeping their fighting spirits up. The one who did the greatest of this was General Fraser. Colonel Morgan dispatched his best marksman to finish off Fraser, because he felt that the battle rested on this man's shoulders. Fraser fell mortally wounded after being struck by one of the marksmen. Just before he was hit, one of his men told him to get off the front lines. A bullet passed through his saddle and another through his horse's mane before he was struck. "My duty forbids me to fly from danger," said Fraser, and the next moment he was struck down and carried back to camp. Burgoyne's men began to panic and break rank. The British retreated to their camp and were followed by the Americans. Benedict Arnold was in a rage and was excited for combat. But in the middle of the fight, Arnold's leg wound that he received from the Battle of Quebec began to pain him, and he grudgingly let his men take him away. The Americans then took over the British right flank and forced them to retreat back to the river. General Gates decided not to send a regular attack, but only sent skirmishes.
The Battle of Yorktown took place on October 9, 1781. The Battle of Yorktown was a decisive victory by combined assault of American forces led by General George Washington and French forces over a British army commanded by General Lord Cornwallis. It proved to be the last major land battle of American Revolutionary War, as the surrender of Cornwallis's army prompted the British government to eventually negotiate an end to the conflict. With the capture of 8,000 soldiers, the British government began to negotiate with the Americans and signed the Treaty of Paris.
Why, hello, dear children.